This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to episode 207 of Geek Leader Podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda, and today's sponsor is Private Internet Access. If you've ever surfed the web and wanted to do it securely, especially when you're traveling or using someone else's network, you definitely need private internet access. Private internet access allows you to have a secure VPN without them logging what data what you're doing, what transactions you're making, or anything like that, to connect to anywhere in the world. You can also change your default location so it appears as if you're coming from a different place. Why is this helpful, you say? If you're not doing anything nefarious, well, it's really helpful if you want to test DNS resolution from different places and different time zones. It's a really cool tool, and it's not very expensive at all. You can get plans starting at $3.99 a month, and you can find out more by going to geekleader.com/VPN. Again, that's geekleader.com/VPN. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I've got Kent C. Dodds, and he is a world-renowned speaker, teacher, trainer who is actively involved in the open source community. And you may remember him from episode 59 if you're a long-time listener, where we talked a lot about development and education and learning. We're going to continue down that same path today and talk about all that has changed in his life over the past couple of years as he's made the transition from working for a company to kind of educating full time. So with all that being said, Kent, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me back. It's really an honor. I guess it wasn't so bad the last time.
No, I think it went really well. It was shared several times, so I appreciate that. I think that was one of my most shared shows at the time on Twitter, which was pretty awesome.
Cool. I'm glad.
So a lot has changed since last time, but if you don't mind, just for people that haven't heard of you or didn't listen to the first episode, can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you got to where you are today and what that journey in your life has been like?
Sure. So let's see. I went to school at Brigham Young University and graduated with a master's degree in information systems in 2014. And while I was still in school, I did a couple internships, and I converted from an intern to full-time at Domo as a software engineer. So through my time at school, I decided I didn't want to go like product management or networking or any of the various other things you could do. I decided I want to be an engineer. So so I started doing JavaScript for them, hopped around a couple different companies in that first year. I think I had 4 jobs in the first year or so after graduating. And ended up at PayPal for 3 years as a JavaScript engineer, working primarily with React. Before that, it was all AngularJS. And then, and there was some Backbone and stuff and earlier on. And then I worked at PayPal for just over 3 years, and then decided to go on my own as an engineer. So, and that was, I guess that was 4 or 5 years after having graduated. So and I've been on my own for the last 2 or 3 years. Now I'm losing track of the years, but it's I think it's 2 years that I've been on my own.
So what was that process like? Like, was it fearful to make that kind of a decision to leave the steady paycheck and kind of go on your own, or is it one of those things you built over gradual and kind of transition to it, or was it more of a cut, like just I'm stopping and trying something new?
Yeah, well, so my wife and I are very risk averse. I have 4 kids, and my wife is a full-time mom, and so we wanted to make sure that we were going to be financially secure before I made this leap. Mm-hmm. And for me, the backup plan for doing something like this is to get a job. In our current industry, even with COVID and the uncertainty of everything, we're still pretty solid in being able to get a job. And even now, you're more likely to get a remote position with the way that COVID has shaken up the industry or the world at large. And so, the backup plan was just to go back and get another job if things didn't work out. but I didn't want to do that. And so I was really confident that things were going to work out because I had been doing stuff on the side since like a month or two after having graduated. So I started making videos for Egghead. Really like a month after graduation. And it was in very short order, my Egghead royalties were paying my mortgage. So it was very non-trivial amount of money that I could make on the side, just in the evenings of recording these videos. And then ultimately I created testingjavascript.com in, let's see, that I think that was November 2018. And that very quickly became apparent that it was going to make up for my salary. And so I could just focus all my time on that and quit my full-time job. And the reason I wanted to do that was because I was doing all of this stuff after hours. As fun as that was, I also have 4 kids and I want to spend time with them. And they're all pretty young. They still go to bed at like 7 or 8. So like it wasn't an enormous, and my wife at the end of the day, lots of the time she's just like, I just want to be alone. So it was never like an enormous sacrifice on my family's part. And if it had been, I would have adjusted things. But my kids are growing up and they're getting involved in different things. And so I wanted to be able to be around for them more often. And so that was part of what motivated the switch, was because I didn't want to work 60 hours a week, 40 for my full-time job and 20 for the side thing. And I just wanted to work a regular 40, or maybe sometimes just work 20 and spend more time with the family. I have a ton of flexibility. And so that's where, in my mind, that's why we make money, is to have freedom. And so if I can make enough money, then I don't need to have the full-time job to make even more money. I've got the freedom that I need with the side stuff that I was doing. And so I can reduce the amount of money I make and increase the amount of freedom that I have. And that's kind of what I'm going for anyway. I don't need to be like a multimillionaire or anything like that. I'm pretty okay with where I'm at now. So
I always encourage people to do that, to kind of have that side thing going all the time. I encourage all my team employees to do something fun on the side. Just it can be work related, or it doesn't have to be work related. It can be something totally different if that's what you want to do. But do something to to brighten your horizon, to give you a fallback if you need it. Like if something happens with our company and you have to go somewhere else or whatever, you have a little bit of a cushion, you have something fun to do, and just see if it's something that you want to do. And I've been doing that, pretty much my whole career too, whether it's teaching part-time at the university, which is an awesome way to keep your skill sets up, to teach, which you found out, I'm sure. Or writing books or doing the podcast or whatever. I think it's always a fun thing to do. It also gives you that extra little income, which is helpful too.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you worked remote before working remote was cool, I guess. Like before the lockdown and things that have happened with COVID in the recent times. What was that like for you the first time you did work remote?
So I did a little bit of remote work before I started at PayPal. I was working at a company not far from my home, like it was a 15-minute commute. But for some reason, there were a couple of days where it was just easier for me to work from home, or I needed to work from home. And so I would work remote maybe once a week or something like that. And so I had a little bit of experience with that, and working as an open source developer. I've been doing open source for as long as I've been programming, pretty much. And so working with people I've never met before in person and collaborating online has always just been something that I've done as a software engineer. And so the switch to full-time remote wasn't a huge shock on that front. The biggest challenge that I found at PayPal was working on a team where I'm the only remote developer and everybody else is in the office together. So the first team that I started on, everybody was in a different office or working remotely. And that's part of the reason that I was able to get a remote position at PayPal. I don't know what it's like right now, but at the time, people did not get hired on as a remote engineer.
Yeah.
And just that didn't happen. And there may have been one or two people who got hired on as a remote engineer, and I was one of them. Anybody else who was working remote had already been an engineer at PayPal and had transitioned to remote. So it was a pretty unusual thing, and PayPal's culture was not super well suited for remote work. And that made it a bit of a challenge. Now, the first team I was on, because there was one remote developer and everybody else was in a different office, it was fine because everybody was working remotely and had to collaborate using the online tools. But as I got shifted around and different people got shifted around my team, I became the only remote developer on a team where everybody else was in the same office on the same floor and everything. And that became a challenge because pretty soon, like it was just easier for people to yell across the room, like, hey, are you working on that? Rather than use Slack or whatever other tool. And so that was a bit of a challenge, but there was the bright side of it too. And that is, I am not the developer who likes to do the DevOps stuff. Like when the servers are on fire, I do not want to deal with that. That's not like where I enjoy spending my time. And so when stuff like that happened, I mean, I was the team lead for part of this, and maybe this is why, like, I don't feel like I'm a very good team lead because I don't like doing this stuff. But yeah, like if things were on fire, the last place they're going to collaborate is using online tools because they're just right next to each other. And so I just was not aware that things were on fire when stuff like really bad stuff went down until the aftermath, when they started doing their like, they've put out the fire, and now they're starting to use the online tools to discuss what happened and how that we can do things better next time. So yeah, I was just never really a part of those urgent conversations. And I think it would have been if the whole team had been remote. That wouldn't have been a problem, or at least a couple of the members of the team were remote. And so, yeah, I mean, there were a couple of times I helped with those situations, but yeah, most of the time it just all happened without me even knowing something was wrong, which I am actually really grateful for. I did not want to do that stuff. So maybe that's why. I don't know.
Well,
but
I mean,
anyway, there were several good things and bad things about being the only remote developer. But I'd say in general, it's best if you can have at least half of the team remote if you're going to do remote work.
Yeah, I agree. I think you feel like if you're the only one remote, you kind of feel like you're missing out. I know, with COVID, there were times where people were back in the office and some people were remote, and trying to figure out what was going on, and that was always seemed to be challenging. And you inadvertently would leave out the people that weren't there, and it's kind of, I don't know, it's a difficult thing to work with. So yeah, I totally get that. What are some things that you've seen, being the team lead while you're remote? How do you motivate or encourage employees or just ensure that they're learning the things they need to be learning or doing the things that they need to be doing?
Yeah, well, because I was remote, there wasn't like hey, let's go for a walk and get a drink or whatever. That just didn't happen. And so I had to be more proactive in reaching out to people. And I tried to do that and just say, hey, how's your day going, sort of thing. But I wasn't super good at that. But one thing that I was good at was reviewing people's pull requests and stuff like that, and participating in that end of development, as well as participating in our meetings for when we're planning for the next sprint or whatever, and making sure that everybody feels good about the tasks that they're volunteering for. And yeah, so like as a team lead, being able to guide the direction of the code base through code reviews primarily. I also did a handful of screen shares and pair programming to help with whatever somebody was working on, especially if it was an area of the code base that I'd worked on before. That happened a fair amount. Yeah, like genuinely being interested. I had a manager. Our team was managed by somebody who didn't take a whole lot of interest in the engineers' careers, and was mostly interested in like status updates and stuff. He was a new manager. Hopefully he figured it out later. That's there's more to being a manager than just getting status updates.
Yeah.
And so I tried to fill in those shoes a little bit and get to know what people wanted and encourage them to pursue opportunities that would get them closer to what they wanted. But like I said, I don't think I was a very good team lead, and I didn't do a very good job of that. And there may have been various reasons, but for the most part, I think it was just not what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I wanted to spend my time doing. And so I did ask to get removed as the team lead and put somebody else in that would do a better job than I would. And I'm not ashamed of that. I actually think that it's good to assess whether you're in a good position. And I didn't feel like I was not helping the company as much as I could with what I did instead. And that was to move to a more architectural role to help all of PayPal with the stuff that I worked on over there. So
I think that takes a lot of courage to do something like that, because, I don't know if it's all developers or engineers or whatever, but we sometimes have an ego and we don't want to say that we're not good at something that we may struggle with. And, I ran into that too when I was first a leader. I was my first team I was managing was a web and mobile development team. And I think I had 2 people quit out of a team of 6 on the same day. And it was one of those things where I met with the mentor that the company had assigned me, and I told him what had happened, and he's like, "Why do you think that is?" And I was like, "Oh, well, there's higher paying jobs at the banks and things like that, and that's where they were going to go." And he's like, "No, that's not it." He's like, "You're not a good leader. That's what it is." You kind of one of those things that kind of right in your face. And when you take a step back and really realize that, yeah, I'm not very good at this, I need to work on it, or I need to go a different direction. You have that point where you say, either I'm going to go back and focus on being an architect or some stronger technical skill, or I'm going to, put some of those technical things to the side and focus on developing my leadership skills and people skills and building that path. And I think a lot of times we have to, as engineers, we have to come into that journey, that fork in the road of which direction we're going to go. And so it's really hard to maintain both unless you're just naturally inclined to be a good leader, I think.
Yeah, I feel like I'm an okay project leader. Like I've shown that in my open source projects that I have created and maintained. Although I do hand off maintenance of projects a lot. But I think in part, I'm only able to do that because I was a good leader and helped encourage other people to participate. I have experience when I didn't do a good job of that early in my career. But I think to your situation, of course, I know nothing about the reasons that those people quit, but the first thought that I have is there's a lot more nuance to something like that. It's never just one thing. Right. At least as somebody who's changed companies multiple times, like sometimes there's something that's clearly the straw that broke the camel's back, but it's always just a straw. There's always more to it than I just had a bad manager. So don't put all of that on you.
I appreciate that. So one question I had, because you are pretty prolific in the open source community, doing a lot of projects and work out there. And I've worked at companies where open source is, the way to go, and other companies where it was strictly forbidden to use open source tools. You had to have something that's supported, something, somewhere you can go. What is your argument for people that if you have a boss that says, no, we're not using open source to kind of break into that market?
Yeah. Okay. So I've actually got a blog post about this called, well, not about this specifically, but it's titled Business and Engineering Alignment. Mm-hmm. And in there, I make the argument that you need to understand what the mission of the company is. That's the first thing. Before you try to convince anybody of anything at any company, you need to understand what the company's mission is. And then you act with the assumption that everybody in the company is solely focused on pushing that mission forward. Now, of course, if you disagree with the mission, that's a good situation to quit your job. But totally different. You probably shouldn't have jumped on board in the first place. But maybe life situations change. But yeah, so like first you have to make sure that you're on board with this mission. And once you've decided that, yeah, I totally want this mission to go forward, then your whole goal should be pushing that mission forward. And so then you have to convince yourself, is what I want going to push this mission forward, or is it going to make things worse? And so if you can't convince yourself that using open source is going to help this mission be pushed forward, then there's no reason to talk to your boss about it. You've already convinced yourself, no, this isn't worthwhile. I would argue that there are very few missions in the world where using open source would not push it forward. I can't think of one. I imagine maybe there's one, but yeah, like using open source will probably push every mission forward. And so you need to convince yourself, okay, so given that I believe that this thing I want to do will push the mission forward, how do I let's quantify that in some way. Like let's try to explain that to myself. How is this going to help push the mission forward? How will inaction hurt the mission? And so once you've been able to kind of articulate that in some sensible way, that's when you take this to the decision makers and you say, hey, listen, our goal as a company is to do X, and using open source or whatever it is that you want to do is going to push that forward. If we don't, then actually our mission will suffer. And so we need to do this because we won't be able to accomplish the mission of the company without it, or we won't be able to accomplish it as effectively. And so then a couple of things can happen out of that. One, they can still disagree with you. They might just say, no, I don't believe you. I still, like, you're missing this, that, and the other. And actually you can kind of preemptively combat that by talking individually. Like if you've got a team of developers you need to convince or something, you talk individually with each member of the team. You say, hey, I'm going to bring this up at the next meeting or whatever. What are your concerns with it? And so you get all of the concerns out of the way. This does two things. First, it helps you to make sure that you know what concerns are going to be brought up so you can prepare and answer those. And maybe in the process of preparing to answer those concerns, you realize, oh, that's a real concern I hadn't considered. But if it's not, then you can at least be prepared and answer that before they even bring up the concern in the meeting. And then the other thing is that if people are already predisposed to disagree with you in that meeting, as soon as one person brings up a semi-valid concern, everybody suddenly shuts down and just latches onto that. And so you want to make sure that nobody's going to surprise you with the concern in that meeting where you're presenting your solution. So you preemptively answer those concerns so that they don't even bring it up, and you say, I already have the answer to that problem. Don't even bother talking about this.
Yeah, that's one of the things that, like, I've learned that when I was going through negotiation training. It was one of those things where, point out the other person's argument ahead of time.
Yeah.
That way you're not caught off guard and you know what they're going to say. And but what happens if you are caught off guard?
Yeah, so you're in the meeting and somebody didn't tell you because they wanted to catch you off guard. Yeah. So I mean, if you have a coworker like that, then they're total jerks. But yeah, so like maybe they just didn't think about it ahead of time when you asked them. But yeah, so if you're caught off guard during the meeting, the last thing that you want to do is just make something up that you aren't certain about. Like, I mean, you can say, well, I don't know about this, but like, here's an idea that I have. But it's probably better, especially when it's high stakes. It's probably better to just say, you know what, I hadn't considered that. Let's put this meeting on recess. Go play in the playground for a while I figure this out. And then we'll come back and talk about this. You don't want to get into a debate with somebody who knows exactly what they're talking about when you don't know what you're talking about. You will lose. And so like if they have this concern, it may be like just a passing concern for them, but the burden of proof is on you. And so you need your argument to be strong, even if their argument is weak. Because the burden of proof is on you, you need yours to be strong. Otherwise, you will lose. So yeah, that would be something that I would suggest. And at the end of the day, it may just be that people are like, no, we can't deny that your idea will push the mission forward, but we also don't want to do it. And if that is what it is, then you have to ask yourself, well, okay, so I'm really committed to pushing this mission forward. I'm getting roadblocks in what I want to do. They're not letting me push the mission forward. Maybe I don't want to work here. I want to go somewhere where I'm not going to get roadblocks on pushing a mission forward. And I really like when in that blog post and just in general, I really recommend just a hyper focus on what's the mission of the company, and you always bring it back to that. And that way, anybody who disagrees with you is disagreeing with the mission of the company. So like if you can convince them in their mind that what you want to do it will push the mission forward, then anybody who disagrees with it is in the wrong.
So why are you so passionate about open source projects?
Yeah, open source. So like at PayPal, we did a lot of open source, and I was hired on with the expectation that I would continue doing open source. That was one of the reasons that they hired me, actually, was because of my affluence in open source, like how active I was in the open source community. And so there are a couple of things that open source has done for me that have just been phenomenal, and probably the most attractive to your audience and of like newer developers is that it gives me just a ton of free mentors who are more than happy to mentor me. So I take a look of the tools that I use that are open source, and I identify things that I don't like about them or I feel like could be improved or whatever. And then I can go and try to improve those things. So I open an issue and I say, here's the problem that I found. I'm not sure what to do about it, but I'm happy to work on this. Or maybe you are sure what to do about it and you make the suggestion. And they say, sure, like, sweet, work on that. And I work on it. I make some pull requests, and then I'm getting feedback. And there's the mentorship right there. They're reviewing my code and they're telling me better ways to approach different things. And so the more and more you do that, the more experience you get. And what's cool about this is you get varied experience. If you contribute to lots of different projects, then you have a lot of different people's opinions on how to write code, and you get experience with working with different types of code. So it's like working for a lot of different companies all at the same time, which just has given me a ton of extra experience beyond of my regular work. The other cool thing is that like you can do this during your regular work if this open source project is something that you use at work and your employer is cool with that.
Yeah.
So I don't think I'd ever work at a company that wasn't cool with that. So like, so you probably won't ever see me working at Apple. But yeah, like participating or when I talk about pushing the mission forward, I don't care what activities I need to do to do that. Well, I mean, certainly I do. I don't want to be, like cleaning the toilets and stuff myself. But like I want to code, and I don't care where that code goes. If that code happens to go into an open source package that we use, and with this bug fixed, I can push the mission forward, then like that's great. If it happens to be some closed source thing that we have, then that's awesome too. I don't really care. And so I found myself at PayPal and at companies before that working on open source quite a bit because we used open source, and that was just the most logical place to put the code. So yeah, open source also can drastically help you push the company's mission forward as well.
Yeah, I never really thought about the free mentor piece of it. I think that's a great tool. Like, I've always thought of it as a way to, build your resume, get experiences that you don't have at your work, especially like where I worked before. We were, coding only in C#. So like, if you want to do something else, you have to do it open source on your own. You can't learn it. You can't learn it there. So it was kind of one of those things where, and actually doing that was what helped me get into iOS development there. Back then it was Objective-C. When iPhones first really came out, we were, when our CIO said, "Hey, does anybody have any experience with this?" I said, "Actually, I was working on a project, and here's an example." Okay, cool. Well, now you're going to lead up that team, and
nice,
and go forward with that. So being able to contribute on the side, I think, was one of those ways that does open up doors. But I never really thought about the free mentors and having people that would look at your code and give you better ways of doing it, and try to make you better at that task.
Yeah, exactly. And, and you have to take everything with a grain of salt because different developers have different opinions, and those opinions might be wrong or I mean, lots of things are subjective in software development. And so that's the nice thing about working on, contributing to multiple open source projects with different maintainers, because that gives you just different perspectives. And then of course, the other thing is just the job opportunities are numerous when you work on open source and you can show people what you do. And that was one of the things that attracted PayPal to me, was that I was so prolific in open source, and they wanted me to continue, and they sponsored my time in working on open source. I open sourced Downshift and Glamorous, and I feel like there may have been one or two others that were smaller. And I actually helped a lot with their process on getting things open sourced. So they were super supportive of that whole thing when I was at PayPal as well, which was really helpful. I know that not all companies are quite that interested in helping you participate in open source, but yeah, it was. Those are a few reasons why I just appreciate and I love open source so much.
Awesome. So when you made the transition, I know you were already doing classes online with Egghead and other things, but when you transitioned to kind of starting your own thing and just going to do this on the side, did you have any other skills that you had to learn, like video editing or audio or things like that may be intimidating to some people that want to go down a similar path?
Yeah, so all of those skills I'd already developed before I went full time, but I definitely needed some of those skills. When I started at Egghead, I was recording, editing all of my own stuff. I was creating my own material, my own curriculum, everything. I did the whole thing, and all they did pretty much was host videos for me. Now they do a little bit more for me. I'm still responsible for creating the material, creating the examples, and all of that, recording the videos. I do all of that still, but I've offloaded the stuff that's not that can be offloaded, right? That's not my value proposition.
Mm-hmm.
And so video editing, Egghead does for me now, and they do a fantastic job. And it's not just like some random editor that they pulled off the street. It's actually somebody who understands the technology, and so they can make the right appropriate cuts and stuff. And then they also help a lot with creating the idea for the material. So I have an idea. I want to teach people about Remix. And so this week I'm going to be meeting with them to talk about, okay, so what's the overarching goal of what you're trying to accomplish? And so they kind of help me make sure I cover all the bases of what I want to teach in the actual material, so I have the right learning outcomes and stuff like that. So they do a ton. They also do all of the artwork and everything as well. So even at the beginning, so I should say they did more than just host the content. They actually do a ton. So like this whole time, of course, they will take people's money, give it back if they want a refund. Like they do all support, all of that stuff. I would never want to do all of this by myself because I wouldn't be able to get nearly as much done. And my goal isn't to make a ton of money. My goal is to reach a ton of people and help them make better quality software. And so that's why I work with Egghead in the first place, is because I can do that more effectively with them as a member of my team than doing all of that on my own. And so that's why I offload more to them. But yeah, like without partnering with Egghead, then yeah, you need to learn how to record and edit. It takes a lot of practice, like so much practice to get good at this stuff, and to do yeah, to make it an effective use of somebody's time, because more than the money that you're asking their time. And so some people will say that I'm a little bit fast, and I just respond with, that's why we have a button to pause and like to slow down the video and stuff, because I don't want to be wasting anybody's time. You'll never see in my paid content anything that's like, all right, everybody, my name is Kent C. Dodds, like before every single video, like where the video is 2 minutes long, but the intro and outro combined is a whole minute. Like,
yeah.
Those are the worst. I don't like that kind of content. But anyway, it takes a lot of practice to figure out what works for you. And so more than the, I guess, the skills you will learn as you do it. And so this is why kind of hedging your bets and practicing this before you go on your own is a good idea. Start making money and try to get the passive income going before, like, you prove out the idea before you lose your actual salary. Make sure that you work on the audience as well, and don't do any of this like stupid growth hacking stuff where it's like, what's your favorite IDE as a tweet? Like, trying to get that. Those are so obvious. Don't do those kinds of tweets. But yeah, like just provide genuine, useful information, give people a good reason to want to follow you, and to trust you with their time. And you provide just a silly amount of time for free, silly amount of content for free, so that they can develop that trust in you, so that when you have something to for them to pay for, they're like, okay, yeah, he knows what he's talking about, or she knows what she's talking about. I want to give them money for more of that stuff. So I've got tons of thoughts on this, but I'll stop talking.
So why have you kind of focused heavily on React? Why has React kind of been your framework of choice?
Yeah, well, I started with Backbone at Domo, then we went to AngularJS, and I dove really deep into AngularJS. I contributed a couple of times to the AngularJS core. So, and then Angular 2, its forms implementation was heavily inspired by my AngularJS forms library called Angular Formally, which I didn't create, I maintained. I took over later. And now it's archived. Nobody, but actually, I think it's still the most popular forms library for AngularJS. But yeah, there's no development on it. It's not maintained. But yeah, then I switched over to React, and the thing that really won me over for React was how simple it is. So simple is a different word from easy, just to keep that in perspective. It may not be easy for you to learn, but you can make it easy, make it familiar. But the fact is that it is simple. I love how simple it is. And I have a blog post about this that people can look up. It's why I love React. But yeah, so since like the end of 2015, I've been all in on React. And I think that for me, it's just the simplest way to build an application. It is very difficult to build a simple application with a complex framework. But it's relatively easy to build a complex application with a simple framework, but it is possible to build a simple application with a simple framework. And so I feel like I can build a better application, web application with React than I can with anything else that I've used. Now, I'm not trying to throw shade at other frameworks. I'm sure other people really love the frameworks that they use, and I haven't dived too deep into like Vue or Svelte. I've done Hello World and both of those, but nothing more than that. I really don't like template DSLs, and so like I just, maybe I've been scarred by AngularJS templates and diving into their compiler one too many times. But I love that React compiles directly to JavaScript, and I can understand what JSX converts into. Like, just in my mind, I understand that to me speaks to some of the simplicity of React. And so I feel like I have a lot of power with React. And in particular with, I just got another shot of excitement with React with the new framework called Remix that Ryan Florence and Michael Jackson are working on. There's so much more that I can do with React, so many problems that just go away with web development in general, not just React, but web development when I am using Remix. So yeah, I've never been more excited about building applications with React now that Remix is around.
So someone who's not familiar with Remix, give me like a 2-minute spill of what is it and why I should pay attention to it.
Yeah, Remix is what we call a meta framework. So if some people don't like calling React a framework, I don't really care. But but Remix is a server rendered framework. So you run a server. It's in Node, and it renders your React, or with Remix, you can render your React components on the server, send those up to the client, and then the client rehydrates those React components and to make it interactive. What I love about Remix, because there are a lot of frameworks that do this. There's Gatsby and Next.js, and they all have kind of different takes on this. Gatsby is a server or static site generator. Next is can be both actually. But what makes Remix special is it embraces the web platform. And so you're working with real response and request APIs that you Google on MDN to understand how that works. You have total control over everything that is rendered. So the response that comes back from the server when you're trying to render a page, you're the one responsible for actually rendering the React component. You can render anything else that you want to from there. You're calling React render to string right there. And then on the client side, you're the one calling React DOM hydrate. And so you have a lot of power. You're also rendering the HTML tag. And so like there are so many APIs that they don't need to implement because they just give you so much of this power. And that's another one of the things that I love about it. The APIs that they give you for loading data kind of eliminate the need for most people for GraphQL because lots of the problems that GraphQL solves are just not problems when you're using Remix. Same thing with React Query. You don't really need React Query. Mutations are easy, and all of this stuff works whether you have JavaScript enabled or not. And so if somebody has an unreliable connection and the JavaScript fails to load, your app should probably still work when you're using Remix. You can't say the same for really any other JavaScript framework. Yeah, and just their attention to the progressive web app kind of idea and the focus on the platform has me really excited. And so that's why people should give Remix a solid look.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate having you on. Is there any other things you want to share, or how can people connect and find out more about the classes that you're offering and the things that you're teaching right now, and learn more about Kent C. Dodds?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing that I worked on recently is EpicReact. We don't have time to dive too much into it, but it is unlike anything that you've ever seen before. It really is. And you can probably just ask on Twitter, what do people think of EpicReact? And you'll get responses. There are a lot of people who have taken it and just love it. It is basically 11 workshops of highly interactive exercises and material for you to go through and learn really almost everything that I know about React. So I'd strongly advise people to give that a solid look. And then, of course, testingjavascript.com is everything that I know about testing, which is not a small amount. I created React testing library and DOM testing library that is like becoming the de facto standard for testing every JavaScript framework. So yeah, it's those are the two biggest things that I'm working on. I also have an active blog, and people can subscribe on my website, kentcdodds.com. I'm active on Discord. I have a Discord community. It's awesome, really cool place to hang out. And you'll find a link to that on my website. And then I'm pretty active on Twitter as well, Kent C. Dodds.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes at geekleader.com. And welcome back to the show. I really appreciate having you on. And if you ever want to come back, do this again, just let me know.
All right. It sounds great, John. Thank you.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some t-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.